I would like to introduce to you our founder, Michele Martin, who in 1973, a student of Joshi Sasaki Roshi, was moved to find a place where he could come and teach his Zen Buddhism. So we're very grateful for Michele and finding this site of Bodhi Manda Zen Center, a site that has grown and developed from her foundation and uh, will continue to offer these wonderful Dharma teachings for all human beings. Michele, please share with us a few words about your insight into this place and your evolution with it. Thank you, Michele.
Thank you. So first, I'd like to say how glad I am to be back in touch with you, Hosen. It's been a long time. I've spent maybe 30 years in India and Nepal, and it just recently moved back to the US. So I'm very happy to be back in touch again. And Hosen had asked me to share a little bit about the early days and how Bodhi happened. So I will attempt to do that. And you know, when you look back to beginnings, it's difficult to find where something actually begins. Everything is so interconnected. Was that the event? But maybe then it was due to that. So to kind of shorten the story, I will go back to the late 60s and 70s when the counterculture was flourishing in the US, and I was part of that. And one of the concepts that we had was of liberating space, which meant that you opened up a place for something meaningful to you to happen. So I had that concept kind of in the back of my mind. And in 72, I packed up all my dissertation books and drove cross country from New Haven to California, where I wanted to write my dissertation in a barn by the sea, like a romantic. And I was driving Route 66, and we came to New Mexico, and there was a sign that said Santa Fe Taos. And I remember my grandparents had gone there. So I took a right turn, went north, and I thought I'd stay a couple days, and a month later I was still there. And of course, as the license plates say, land of enchantment, and it was true. So I wound up coming back to New Mexico, not staying in California, and became involved with Lama Foundation. I was a trustee there, and I spent time and was teaching some meditation in Santa Fe. So it must have been 1973, I went for a first sesshin with two friends from Lama Foundation. They were going to Mount Baldy to do a sesshin, and I had read a lot of D.T. Suzuki, and I thought, oh, this is great. I can at last actually do the practice. So I went with them, and the sesshin was tougher than I could have ever imagined. But I also realized that it was just exactly what I needed as a form of practice. So I came back to New Mexico and wondered, how can I connect with this? Because I didn't want to leave New Mexico, and I wanted to practice Zen. So how to resolve that? So I thought, well, I'll invite Sasaki Roshi to come and teach in New Mexico. And so when I went back for my second session afterwards, I talked to Roshi and I made this proposal to him. And he thought for a while, and he said, you find hot springs, I come. So I went back to New Mexico, and we had this sort of network of counterculture people. There weren't too many centers for practice or meditation at that time. But so we all knew each other pretty well, and the word went out. And one day when I was actually back at Mount Baldy, I got a call from Maria Chabot, who was Georgia O'Keeffe's general manager for her ranch up in Abiquiu. And Maria had retired, and she was working up a phone switch center in Albuquerque. And through that, she was eavesdropping on a phone conversation and heard that this Jemez Springs, there was a old hotel that had become a monastery that was for sale. So she called me at Mount Baldy and she said, Michele, you have to get back here immediately. I will meet you at the airport. And she wouldn't take no for an answer. So I was on a plane, Albuquerque. We drove up to Jemez Springs. And there was this hotel. And we walked in and looked at the old chapel. And it had green and red linoleum tiling from the 50s on it. And the walls were dark. And we thought, well, we could open this up with wood and paint things white, the windows. And we went out and back and walking by the river, and we saw this depression by the river, and there was some water in it. It looked, and we touched it, and the water was hot, and it looked as if one of the brothers had been sort of bathing in this. So we thought, oh, they're hot springs as well. So I sent pictures to Roshi and talked to him about it, and he said, okay, go with it. So then we started with talking to the Paraclete brothers, Father McNamara, who was always very kind to us. And we got all the legal things worked out. And then there was the project of repurposing this monastery. So again, we sent the word out into the community, free room and board, come join us building this monastery. So people started trickling in. It was January and 5 people, 6, and it kept growing. And at the end, we had around 12, 13 people that were working full time. And we set up a place to do lumber work, sort of a carpentry center. We ordered it on the stove from Los Angeles. We brought in a big bale of kapok and tons of black cloth, and I bought a sewing machine in the room next to the dining room, which we call the living room. That was the sewing center. And it was just a very special time. There was such wonderful energy amongst people of wanting to help and make this place happen. So it was a wonderful sort of interdependent event in itself that all of us were there. And at night we would hang around together, make a big meal, talk. And miraculously, in 2.5 months, we were able to rebuild the whole thing, build the beds, the tons, make the zafus and the zapatons and the kimonos, and everything was ready when Roshi came for the first sesshin, the opening day. And from there on, things continued. We to kind of look at it at a perspective of what is happening now. One of the things we did was investigate downhole heat exchangers, so we wouldn't have to pay big heating bills, and we shared that with people in town, and quite a few people did the same thing. And we also worked with the town. We had people on the volunteer fire department, and I trained as an EMT and was on call for the ambulance, and we walked in the Ascension Day parade with the Catholic Church, and it was a wonderful small community, but we felt we shared a lot with them. And we did fairs, baked bread and tea for the local fair. And then we also started gardening. And the gardens, those days were just berms, and we supplied a good part of our food from it, but nothing like what Christine Wilson's been able to do with it since she's come there. So we have the woofers and the pantry, which is such a great idea. We started making tofu and we sold it to the co-ops in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, but it was nothing like the pantry with all this luscious food and vegetables available. So that's just wonderful to see that growing. And we also, we had a connection with the Pueblo as well. There was an elder who would come and visit and just kind of hang out, and we'd have a cup of tea and we'd talk about the weather and plants and the garden. And I felt like he was simply sort of overseeing us, kind of giving the blessing of including us in their world. And I know from what Hosen said that relationship has really developed, it's beautiful. I'm so glad that happened. And another thing that I had wanted to happen at Bodhi was some experiments with Zen. I felt like it could be adapted more to the modern days without losing the vitality and the, the the spirit and force of the practice. And so we started doing exercises, which was not done at Mount Baldy, but we got up in the morning and did exercises before chanting. And I noticed in the schedule there's also exercise later in the afternoon when it's better for the body. So that's a wonderful thing. And I'm so glad the chanting's happening in English. It's wonderful that people actually know what they're chanting. It goes deeper, I think, when it's in your own tongue. And also having the full moon meditations, that's such a lovely idea. So I'm really delighted that it's kind of opening up in this way and yet keeping the tenure of the practice at the same time. So when I was staying at Bodhi, sometimes I would wonder, am I doing enough for the world by just being here and practicing? And I would turn to the teachings on interdependence, which one of Roshi's translators used to call mutually unimpeded interconnectedness. And saw that, if you go back to the Huayan tradition, there's this beautiful image of Indra's net where each crystal at the crossings of the net reflects all the other crystals. And this fact that we do live in a very interdependent world, which means that the work that we do in our own mind and our own being, that makes a difference in the world, that connects to us, to everybody. And the work that we do in ourselves benefits everybody. And a more sort of mundane image of that is if you take a street with houses all along it and everybody has a broom, and if people keep the space in front of their house clean, the whole street is clean. So in that way, you're helping the whole neighborhood. And I feel that that's what Bodhi is doing. It's helping the local neighborhood and it's helping the world neighborhood. And I'm so happy to know that Dana Roshi is coming, that just his presence will benefit everybody who's there. And I would encourage people to take advantage of this wonderful place that Hosen has kept going, to bring, to come here and practice so that your minds will open up and you will come to see this wonderful, rich, luminous reality that's present to us at every moment. So I thank you for listening and wish you the best. Thank you. And then there's one thing I forgot to say, which relates to what I ended with, and that has to do with the pandemic and the effect that it has. And also the fact that Bodhi has continued to provide this wonderful space for people throughout this really difficult time. And in listening to people talk about what the pandemic was for them, a lot of them have said, it forced me to look inside. It forced me to find my inner life and to recalibrate my values. And I think that is the great gift of the pandemic. And I am so glad that Bodhi will be there for people that want to come and explore that inner life at Bodhi. Thank you.